Now, if I want to write a book, I just ask you that question. Now I got two things I can now KPI track. Am I reading nonfiction? And am I writing every day?
Well, if you were writing fiction, you would be reading
fiction.
That's right. So are you purposefully reading, and how many books are you getting through?
Yeah. And now I can track that. Like, I use a habit tracker. There's lots of different habit trackers out there. We do it in the tribe. We do it, are you doing it? And if not, if you know you're doing it, then you're probably going to, and if you don't get the results, then maybe you have the wrong input. So if the output that you're getting is dirty, then go clean up your input and fix it. Yeah.
The gap between those two is while you're reading, like Gus is helping me like dissect a podcast, right? Yeah. He's my apprentice for a little while. And I was like, I want this cut into quotes. Go and get the actual transcript and like who said it and when they said it, so that like this is all fodder for something. Like we also do that with our books. Yeah. So I underline and I write, and all of that becomes stuff. If I'm reading those books, I don't have to go reread the book 5 years from now when I think, man, I should go back to Man's Search for Meaning, and that book taught me something. I can open up the opening pages, and so like you have to go a little bit more than just reading it.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah, I seldom read a nonfiction book without a pen in my hand.
God bless you.
Yeah, I have to have that pen.
People apologize. They'll like show me. I wrote all over it. I'm like, that's the best book, right? That meant you were actually interacting with it and having a conversation with it the entire time.
You ever read the book? It was recommended by like 50 people. I finally read it. The Road Less Stupid from Keith Cunningham.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
There's a chapter in that book, chapter 10, and it's all about him and his buddies all went bankrupt back in the 80s or whatever. And so he's like, hey, me and my buddies all sat down and wrote down every lesson we learned in that time, and we just listed them out in this chapter. And it's just like 100 just one-liners.
It's so good.
I underlined every single verse, line of that chapter.
I love that you just said verse.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's my Bible right now because we're in a very similar maybe time. Yeah. And I'm like, why not learn from a guy who's been there and done that? And like, this is what he learned. And so I mean,
well, we took the 4-day MBA from Keith. He teaches a class called the 4-day MBA, and it's highly intensive. It's expensive. But
it'll teach you how to really read a balance sheet and the P&L.
And a lot of those lessons came out, and it was really good.
Yeah.
So there was a story that I had read about, and I'm trying to think of what was the multifamily, the shopping mall investor that Gary modeled profit share on.
I don't know.
Anyway, it was in the Southwest. They owned more malls.
Wasn't it like the haircutting place?
No. It is a commercial investor.
Okay.
Anyway, they owned more shopping malls and commercial real estate than anyone else. And in the savings and loan bust, like they were in crisis, and they managed to come out of it and still be on top. Like they could, like most of those commercial buildings went back to the bank. They did the same thing. And there's a memo that was floating around where he had every executive write down what were the mistakes we made and what did we learn from them. And that document, which is almost impossible because it's all these old typed memos that have been mimeographed and photographed, it's almost impossible to read. Yeah. Like I made myself last year when we thought.
Is that what you got?
I went and downloaded that. I found it on the web finally, and then went through all 89 pages. And I was just underlining the lessons learned. Yeah. Too much leverage, right? Yep. They got ahead of their skis. They were buying way too much land because they were.
You wrote a copy of the 20% around that.
I did.
Yeah.
But it was like the same thing. It's like learning. People have lived before us, right?
Yeah.
They have real lessons to teach us today. Like we'd be stupid not to listen.
Yep.
Yeah, we can learn from our own mistakes by making the same ones, or we can learn from their mistakes and try to pick up some wisdom.
Or some of each.
Yeah. All right. So where did the connection to Gary Keller come from? How did you get into the world of that, and which led to Millionaire Real Estate Investor, which, back on Bigger Pockets when I was doing that, like, I don't know, that was the second most commonly cited book behind Rich Dad Poor Dad as a book that like changed people's life. Yeah.
All right.
That book was, everyone talked about it. So you made a big impact with that one, but where did Gary enter the picture?
So after our honeymoon, right, that we were out backpacking, we knew that we didn't want to live in New York City and start a family there. So we had looked at a few destinations, like we had looked at Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Raleigh-Durham.
Yeah, Raleigh-Durham, and like Wendy had been to Austin a few times.
I loved Austin.
And so we went and spent a weekend there. And coming from New York City in January, like showing up in Austin, and it's like 79 degrees. We didn't have any of the right clothes. And it was like super warm and friendly, and all the food was cheap and plentiful.
Plenty of tacos, plenty of margaritas.
Yeah. So it's basically like, we loved it so much, we moved there without jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And so Wendy got a job because she has a real career, PR and marketing at that time. And I was like an editor New York publishing. Like
Yeah.
there was nothing.
Yeah.
And so I did a horrible job of freelancing until Wendy said, get a job. And one of the 3 places I applied to was
I would
Keller
come
Williams.
home and
Well, I was done. I was playing Diablo by the time she got home.
Jay was on the computer every day. I was like, okay, your freelancing days are over. You need to get a real job.
Financially, it was an inauspicious beginning to my half
because
of the marriage.
I actually had 2 jobs at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we that was great though. Like, so that person who's beating themselves up, you have hope because man, I was kind of a loser. It was me and the cat, right? And look up, and I applied for a newsletter writing job at Keller Williams, and when I joined, I was the employee number 27.
Yeah. Wow. Cato's
There-
Corner wasn't the name
Cato's
of the newsletter.
Corner.
Yeah.
And it was an internet newsletter for their tech team, and there were 6,700 agents total back then.
How many are there now?
180,000 in 57 countries.
Wow.
Incredible growth.
So it's been kind of a rocket ship ride. And
Yeah.
so like I got to start a bunch of departments, and I just liked it because they were very entrepreneurial. Like they handed me a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The then president started our network journey.
Well, even
I
the
had to-
hiring process was incredible.
Yeah, I thought I was applying to be in the CIA.
Yeah.
They gave me like multiple behavioral instruments. I was like, it's a newsletter job.
Yeah.
Like it's 40,000 a year newsletter job. And they made me take 2 separate, like the disc and some other behavioral instrument, and then validated them at length. I was like, this is
It
a
was
front for the
crazy.
CIA.
Yeah.
There's no other way.
I was like, are you going to get this job or not?
But a couple of years into that, I found out he was writing books. And I bumped into him in the bathroom because we were still that small. He was like plunging a toilet. He owned the building. It was a Class C commercial space, and he made a joke about it. And I said, Gary, I hear you're writing a book. Do you remember I used to work at HarperCollins? And clearly he'd forgotten that part.
Yeah.
And he took me into his office, and it's not like the Fonz, like a stall. Like
Yeah.
we went into his actual office,
real office.
and he had a vision for writing 13 books already. And he pitched me on the Millionaire Real Estate Agent and said, how many copies do you think it would sell? And I asked him a few questions. I said, if you really nail it, 50,000 copies, which, is a lot.
Yeah,
And back then it
that's
would have
a
been a
ton.
lot.
Yep.
Well, especially when there's only 6,000 agents at the
Yeah.
time, or 10,000 or whatever
But
it was
he-
at that point.
But he had a vision to do it as a business, and he wasn't happy with that answer. He goes, will it be a bestseller? I said, probably not. And because that's true of almost every book. And he laid out 5 books that he had been with his partner, then our partner, Dave Jinks, who's since passed away. They'd taken 5 books and were taking parts of them, like Good to Great, the executive summaries. Body for Life was a book about fitness. It had myths and truths. And Mia Hamm's Go for the Goal had these profiles of individuals and what they were really good at. And there was The Millionaire Next Door, which I went back and read, and it's not.
Oh, it's horrible.
But I still like the idea of it, right? And
It's so sexist.
yeah.
Oh, funny.
But
I
it was
haven't read that in a
how.
long time.
Don't read it.
But he liked the idea that they went out and asked what all these people had in common.
Yeah.
Versus like one person's story. And I never can remember the 5th, but I edited Mia Hamm and Body for Life. And I just said, I showed him my name in the acknowledgments, and he basically called my boss
Yeah.
and said, good news, bad news.
Talk about serendipity.
Yeah, and said, Jay's got a new position. He doesn't work for you anymore. And I was applying to be his ghostwriter, basically, on the first book. That's how we started. Wrote the first book in a little over 90 days. And that one, not 50,000, is like 1.6 million copies now.
Amazing.
Wow.